when we talk about music, many things are relative. But first of all, we should think about dynamics. Of course, dynamics are relative, because in the score I can see forte, or piano, or mezzo forte, and of course it's just an indication, but it doesn't mean that I have to pick up a certain precise loudness in terms of decibel and just get it from the beginning to the end exactly the same. No, music itself needs a variation, a little bit more, a little bit less, going back, just spreading, reaching a peak, and so on. So it changes. And also, when you conduct the orchestra, you have to think. Every section has a forte, but we have to understand, maybe strings, forte, maybe brasses a little less, maybe timpani a little softer, maybe basses too much, viola not enough, and so on. So it is relative, because you have to make up your mind about what takes a little more and what takes a little less. So, of course, this is relative. But the most important thing, and this video is really about that, is that tempo is relative. And many people nowadays I see that still don't understand this, to me, so important, I would say problem, because it's a problem, really. So they consider tempo as a constant. You see the metronome mark? It is 112, so that must be 112. I don't care, other elements, other things, maybe you have to improve your technique, maybe you have to play a little softer, maybe you have to play a little louder, I don't care. You have to adjust, but is 112. So to me, this consideration is really nonsense, and you don't need to be a scientist or a great musician to understand this. Just think of a piece, say an orchestra piece, whatever piece you like, okay? And now think that you will play this piece first in a very echoey church, right? And then you go next day to the recording studio, which is mostly anechoic, okay, to record your piece. So how can you think that the metronome mark will be the same in the church, very echoey sound, and in the dry sound of the studio? It's nonsense. Of course, in the church, I need to slow down the tempo. And when I go to the studio, I don't know, maybe is 112? Maybe it's so dry here that 112, it feels a little bit too slow. Maybe 115 or 16, we need a little more. It is possible, of course. That is tempo. So tempo is not a constant element, is the condition by which music and musical elements can express themselves, can realize themselves, can be there, can exist. The condition by which music exists, musical elements exist. Many of you now are thinking about the long chorale, about the Beethoven's symphonies, about the metronome marks written by Beethoven in the symphonies. I don't want to get into the personal consideration. Beethoven liked it, Beethoven didn't like it, Melzel wanted, the editor wanted, Beethoven wrote in a letter, metronome, go to hell, and so I don't want to get into that. I just want to stick to the sound. Just thinking of a clarinet or a trumpet or a violin, I don't know, played in a 1800 orchestra, and a clarinet, a trumpet, a violin played in a nowadays orchestra. The difference of the sound, the difference of intensity, richness of harmonics of the sound, different strings, different everything, right? Different technique of the player, 1800 nowadays, 2 centuries of evolution of technique, way of playing the instrument, and so on. How can we think that all these amazing different elements are not important in order to decide what is the good, the right tempo to be played today? Again, it is nonsense. When you have to decide the tempo, the pace of the piece, you have to analyze the musical elements, and they should be clear one after the other. You have to hear them, you have to understand them, using your ears once again, not following a number. When the elements are too far apart, okay, this is not good, because the richness of the music is lost. You have the holes here and here and here. When the elements are overlapping one over the other, it is not good, because you cannot hear what the music is about. So the right tempo is putting them one clearly after the other, just attaching the elements. If you don't do so, you are not making music. Maybe you are doing something to sell recordings, but it's not making music at all. The vertical pressure must be related to the horizontal pressure. What am I talking about? Vertical pressure is the complexity of all the sounds together in the vertical of the score. All the sections, all the instruments, the complexity of the chord, and so on, in relation to the tempo. You cannot just fix this. This is 112, and now what happens here? I don't care. We have to adjust. We have to do something in order to make it good. No, you have to decide this in relation to this. Otherwise, you don't get musical elements. One more thing, think of a violin, think of a double bass. When you play a note in a violin, of course, that note just expresses itself in a very short time, let's say a portion of a second, because it is high and it has not so many harmonics above it, or they are there, but you cannot hear them because they are well above the range of audibility. But when you play the lowest string of a double bass and you have a B or you have a C, and that note takes more than 2 seconds to become fully and express fully itself, because the harmonics are so many and you can hear them because they are into the human range, then this is a basic consideration to decide the tempo. And I'm talking about one single note. Think now of the complexity of an entire orchestral chord. So you cannot say, I don't care, okay, that is a very fast note to hear, that is a very slow note to hear, I don't care. These physical elements are out of my consideration. I just want to play it lively, and that's it. So you, double bass, just play lighter and we go. You can understand that we miss something when we think this way. So if you want to make music, you have to understand that physical elements are always there, and tempo is not a constant, is just a condition to allow music to come alive every time. Back to Beethoven to close this video. Beethoven, besides all these things, the letters and so on, said one, to me, very, very important statement to understand the man, but most of all to understand a musician, how a musician should think. And he said, simply said, metronome is not useful for a very talented person, musically talented person. And then he added, but metronome is not useful to a non-talented person. You can think about that, because, of course, it doesn't want to say that metronome is not useful. It is very useful when you have to study, when you have to work out a passage or whatever. But when you have to play, metronome must be put aside, and you have to make music, you have to hear music, you have to clear all the elements of the sound, the physical elements of the instruments, the harmonics and so on, and that is the good taste that Beethoven is talking about. If you have good taste, it doesn't need a metronome. If you don't have good taste, you don't need a metronome.